Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is introduce. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear the verb introduced used is to mean to bring something into use or operation for the first time. When I thought about this particular definition, I thought about iPhones and smartphones. They were brought into use in the year 2007. That was the first time that they were operated. A second way you might hear the verb introduced used is to make someone known by name to another person, and you're generally doing that in person. When I teach in a classroom, not on YouTube, I spend a significant amount of time the first day introducing myself, having students introduce themselves to me as well and to one another. A third way you might hear the verb introduced used is to mean to occur at the start of something. I feel like this definition ties really nicely into the fourth one, which is to provide an opening explanation or announcement for something. So as I think of definitions 3 and 4, my mind goes to writing and speeches or presentations, right? So it's very common as we look at a piece of writing that there is an introduction. What is the general topic? Maybe what is some background information I need to know before I read or understand the rest of the essay or paper or presentation. And the idea here is this beginning explanation is occurring at the start of this piece of work. You should know that introduce is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all you need to do is drop the E and then add ing to form introducing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. The base verb, introduce, ends in an S sound, so our past tense ending is going to make a T sound. Introduced, introduced. I have one additional meaning connected to phrasal verbs here, and that phrasal verb is introduce into. And this can mean to insert, add, join, or bring into something. Let's look at an example. This might be something you hear an art teacher say to a particular student. You should introduce a few more colors into your painting, right? So here the teacher is saying you need to add some other colors. It will make it look better for this reason or that. Okay, so that's the idea here of introduce into. So it's being added into the existing painting. All this week, we are going to focus on the active versus the passive voice. And I feel like it's always good to do a little bit of review. So as you listen to a great deal of spoken English and read it as well, you probably will encounter more sentences that are in the active voice. And an active voice sentence is beginning with the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. Sometimes it helps to think about like who is doing the action. That won't work for all verbs, but generally if you can understand that, it might help you. So let's look at two active voice sentences. John washed the dishes. We know that John is responsible for the action of washing. Second example, Susan cooked dinner. Here we know Susan is responsible for the action of cooking. Sentences in the passive voice, however, are going to begin with the person or the thing that is acted on. The person who is responsible for the action might not be included in the sentence, or if they are included, they're going to come at the end of the sentence and it'll be right after the preposition by. Here's an example. I've taken my two active voice and made them passive. The dishes were washed. Dinner was cooked, right? I could also say the dishes were washed by John. Dinner was cooked by Susan. Those sentences are going to have the same meaning as the active voice ones we looked at earlier. So many people ask, well, why do we have this passive voice? And there are a few different reasons. The first common one is that the person who is responsible for the action just is unknown. So we don't know who to say is responsible for it. So we kind of work around that and lead with the thing or person that was acted on. A second reason might be that the person who is responsible for the action just isn't all that important. The importance or emphasis is really meant to be on the thing acted upon or the person acted upon. And so that kind of connects to our third reason here. If a writer or speaker really wants our focus or our attention to be on that object, it can help to start the sentence in that way. A fourth reason some people might use the passive is when they don't want to blame someone. So I always think of the example of using someone's name made a mistake, right? That could be kind of hurtful to some, even though it may be true, right? It might just seem a little too direct. So if we can soften it by saying mistakes were made, right? And we're not kind of finger pointing, saying like you made the mistake, that might help our working relationships with one another. So with all of this in mind, today we're going to focus on the simple past tense, and we'll look at active voice and passive voice sentences. Let's start with affirmative active. Okay? To make an affirmative active voice sentence in the simple past tense, we're going to use that ed form of the verb. You can see it in the example here. The author introduced readers to some new characters in the second book. Okay. Many authors will kind of continue to build on certain stories through multiple books. That series it can be quite common, and some readers really enjoy kind of learning more, digging deeper into stories and learning about certain characters. Now, if I want to make passive voice with that same sentence, the uh, people in this case who received the action of the introduction here were the readers. So I'm going to move that to the front, and then I'm going to use was or were and then the participle form of the verb. Now, since introduce is a regular verb, it looks the same as past tense, but I want you to remember it's the participle in case you're encountering an irregular verb. So the passive voice form of the sentence is readers were introduced to some new characters in the second book. So if this was a longer discussion, it might be very obvious. Of course, it's the author who's responsible for the action. Now let's look at making negative sentences. In the active voice, to do this, you're going to use did, not, and then the base verb. So no ed in the negative active voice. But in the passive voice, we're going to use was or were, then not, then the participle form of the verb. Again, my two examples here are going to have the same meaning. Companies didn't introduce this technology to consumers until the 1990s. Okay? So again, this is tying back to that first definition of the verb we looked at. So some particular technology wasn't used until the 1990s. Another way to say this technology wasn't introduced to consumers until the 1990s. Finally, let's look at making some yes or no questions. In the active voice, I'm going to use did, then my subject, then the base verb. So again, no ed in our yes or no questions. This compares to the passive voice. We'll start with was or were, depending what our subject is, and then we'll use the participle form of the verb. So let's look at our two examples. Did I introduce you to my coworkers? Right? So someone might kind of be wondering, right? Did we exchange names and some basic information? Okay. This could be slightly different if I said, were you introduced to my coworkers? Right? Maybe I did it, but maybe someone else at the gathering did it. We're not sure who is responsible here in this passive voice sentence for the action of introducing. Now let's spend just a little bit of time looking at two words that are related to our verb introduce. The first word we're going to look at is the noun form introduction. This can have a few different meanings, just like our verb. So the first way to use the noun introduction is to mean the action of introducing something, right? So the action of beginning to use or operate something. You can see this usage in the example sentence. Since the introduction of COVID-19 vaccines, cases have been decreasing. So again, if we look to the point when the vaccines started to be used, that's what that's implying or stating in the sentence. A second way to use the noun introduction is to mean a formal presentation of one person to another that includes names. So this noun form again ties back to the second definition of our verb. So this idea of like, hi, I'm Katie, and another person says their name, that makes an introduction. So now as people begin to gather again in person for meetings and the like, you might hear someone say, let's make some introductions and then we can begin the meeting. So in a business setting, this might include saying your name, saying your title. If it's people from a variety of different companies, maybe saying which company or organization that employs you, and maybe providing some other information if you've been instructed about that. Our third way to use the noun introduction is to mean a preliminary or beginning section of a piece of writing, a speech, music, etc. So my example sentence here might be something you've heard from another teacher at an earlier point in time. Today in class, we're going to work on your introductions. So this could be working on that first paragraph or first section of your essay or report. Could also be the first part or beginning section of a presentation or a speech. Let's look at our last word today. It's the adjective introductory. It means serving as an introduction to a subject or a topic. It could also mean very basic. An example of this, she's taking an introductory Spanish course. Right? So this is a very basic Spanish course. They're not going to read novels in Spanish, right? They're going to learn some important words and phrases and hopefully maybe work on their listening a little bit. I hope today's video has been a nice introduction to this verb introduce. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.